More of the Zach Gelb Show on Fox Sports 920 The Jersey.
All right, welcome back in. Zach Gelb Show, Fox Sports 920 The Jersey. Brian Baldinger still to come a little bit under an hour from now at 5:15. We're going to head out to the phone lines right now. Welcome in our first guest of the day, Bryan Kalbrosky, who covers the Rams for RamsWire.usatoday.com. And we were getting into a little bit of a conversation earlier today about the Jamal Adams comments made at the Jets facility yesterday in regards to CTE and player safety, because the commissioner was out there having a little bit of talk. But Brian, we do appreciate a few minutes. Thanks for the time, and how are you? Appreciate you coming on.
I'm doing well, and I appreciate you guys having me and giving the forum to have this dialogue about player safety and also just the way that players speak to the media, and also just an opportunity to maybe speak about the Rams to folks on the other side of the country that maybe aren't following the Rams narrative as much as others.
You got it, no problem. And I do appreciate you reaching out to us because, hey, on Twitter, we all know you only get a certain amount of characters. So what people are trying to say could be lost in context. No doubt about that, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And that's one thing that I think we should definitely welcome more often is when people are going at it and there's an opportunity to expand on thoughts and be more direct with their words.
All
Certainly
right.
An opportunity worth taking.
So we'll talk about Jamal Adams in just a second, but you do cover the Rams, and in Philadelphia, we all know that Jared Goff was picked before Carson Wentz, and some people were thinking, maybe Wentz would have went 1 and Goff would have went 2. You saw Goff play in 7 games. We know the numbers. He was 0-7, 5 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Question number 1 to you as Jared Goff enters year number 2. Where's the Rams fan confidence in one Jared Goff?
Yeah, I think the Eagles certainly had an opportunity, sort of kind of like what Portland had with Greg Oden and Seattle had with Kevin Durant back in the day when the choice became a lot easier at number 2 and number 1 was clearly off the board. So I'm not saying that Jared Goff is the next Greg Oden by any means, but he certainly didn't have a very impressive rookie season. I think it's kind of fair, though, to almost wipe that off the memory for a lot of them, considering he didn't exactly have an offensive line that was offering very much protection. He didn't have an offensive coordinator that knew much about running an offense. It was a former tight ends coach, and realistically, they've basically quadrupled down with offensive coordinators with so many more people with experience with Sean McVay and with his new quarterback coach and the new offensive line coach, all who have served as offensive coordinators in the past. I think Matt LaFleur has done, obviously great work with Matt Ryan, and Sean McVay did wonderful things with Kirk Cousins. And if Jared Goff can reach what Kirk Cousins sort of was doing in Washington, that would be a huge thing for Los Angeles, because Kirk Cousins wasn't exactly doing much to write home about. And if Jared Goff can reach that as his next milestone, then Los Angeles will be in a much better shape moving forward. So I don't know if the city has much confidence in Goff at the moment, but I do think that he has the potential to maybe give them something to believe in once he's actually on the field and has a much more improved offensive line and a much better protection with Andrew Whitworth at left tackle, who's one of the best pass blockers in the game, a huge upgrade over Greg Robinson, who's a huge disappointment for the Rams in the past.
Well, we know in Philadelphia, Carson Wentz, and they had more talent than the Rams last year. That's without a doubt a no-brainer. But he didn't have a lot of great talent when it came to the wide receivers position, and he still showed a lot of bright signs. That wasn't the case with Goff. Were there any positives you could take out of last season, or is it just like, as you're saying, just wipe that sucker clean?
Yeah, the biggest positive, and I think this is actually a pretty natural segue that we're going to talk about later with Adams, is that he looked fairly fearless. For a guy who was not getting any protection from his offensive line, he wasn't looking scared in the pocket, and he was willing to take hits that he really shouldn't have been taking. These were things that I think a lot of other rookie quarterbacks around the league would have been terrified of, just being completely attacked by a defense like, say, Seattle, which is known for being ruthless, and he's getting hits, and he's running into tackles in ways that other quarterbacks maybe would have shied away from it. And I think that sort of confidence in Goff and ability to take a hit was something that will really translate to his future self as a quarterback because, never mind what he can do about a long ball. All quarterbacks in the NFL can throw a ball well, but I think a lot of what future success of quarterbacks can be implicated on will be their mentality. And if his mentality is that he's not afraid to get hit, he's going to be able to hold the ball for a little bit longer and, stay in the pocket. And now that he's going to have better protection, especially with Andrew Whitworth, and an improved offensive line and, better coaching and a better understanding of an offense. I mean, last year Jeff Fisher was a defensive-minded coach, and then they switched to a special teams coordinator. So I don't think that they were exactly coaching their way to success. They'll have a lot more of an improvement in LA with better coaching, better offensive line, and just a team that might be a little bit more hungry. I think last year was a little bit more of a gimme year with their first year back in the city.
Looking at it from this time last year, neither of these quarterbacks were supposed to start week one. We know Goff didn't do that. Wentz wasn't expected to, and then they traded Sam Bradford, and they said, okay, then Wentz is going to be the franchise quarterback, going to be the starter from game one. Why wasn't Goff ready last year to start at week one?
Well, Case Keenum was a totally serviceable quarterback. I think that, much like Sam Bradford, ironically, Case Keenum is not going to be Sam Bradford's backup in Minnesota. But if you look at what Case Keenum is able to do on a football field, I mean, he knows how to run an offense. He's a historically impressive college football player. Proven leader for the offense over in St. Louis when he was coming in at the end of the season the year before that. He just seemed a little bit more ready than Goff. I mean, we saw 7 games from Goff, but there was a lot of question about whether or not he'd be able to take off right away. And I know that Jeff Fisher wasn't sure he wanted to really put all of his stock in himself as a coach into a quarterback that he wasn't sure about yet, considering Fisher realistically knew that his job was on the line and ended up, he did lose his job. But I think, if they had started off the season worse and if they had not necessarily come out with an impressive record like they did with 3-1, Fisher could have gotten fired potentially even earlier than he had.
Why didn't they go Wentz with the first overall pick? I get it. It wasn't a no-brainer, but I think Wentz is going to be a stud. Clearly, a lot of teams and a lot of scouts didn't know how good he could be because of the fact that he wasn't playing Division I football. But why do you think the Rams at the end of the day went with Goff over Wentz?
Well, I think realistically for the Rams, they liked that he was from California. A lot of fans from the Pac-12, and I was covering the Pac-12 actually over at Fox Sports Digital in LA and was watching a lot of Jared Goff football. There was just a lot more familiarity. I think for a team that was, in the middle of such a crucial transition, moving from St. Louis to Los Angeles, they were able to really add a lot of almost continuity with adding the California kid who maybe seemed a little bit more relatable to the fan base. I don't know if it was much of a football decision. And if he ends up being a franchise quarterback and you have a potential franchise running back with Todd Gurley and you potentially have the best defensive player in the game, I mean, that trio alone could be a serviceable way of building a football team that should hopefully get you to the playoffs, especially in the NFC West where it's not, they don't have the Patriots. They don't have a perennial powerhouse as much as, competition could be.
Talking to Bryan Kalbrosky right now on the Zach Gelb Show, Fox Sports 920 The Jersey. Bryan, let's get into the Jamal Adams quote. Let me first play it for the listening audience. We'll play that minute quote, and then we'll react to it.
So I'm all about making the game safer. But as a defensive player, I'm not a big fan of it, but I get it. Again, I can speak for a lot of guys that play the game. We live and breathe, and this is what we're so passionate about. Literally, if I had a perfect place to die, I would die on the field. I would be at peace. I would be at peace, and that's not a lie. Like, it's so much sacrifice that we go through as a team, and just connecting as one and winning ball games. It's nothing like playing the game of football. But again, I'm all about making the game safe. That's all I can say about it.
Bryan, I'll preface what I'm going to say, and I said it in the open because I know you were listening, but I'll just reiterate it. I know that player safety is of great importance, and CTE is a terrible issue that the NFL has to face right now, and they ignored it for many years. But I hear those comments yesterday, and I just think they were taken out of context a little bit when you hear the full quote, and that's why we played the entire quote. I wasn't really disturbed by it. I just thought that Adams was really going off his passion and just going off the line of saying that he would do whatever it takes to make it in this league. Just your reaction to the comments from yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, it's definitely good to listen to the full quote rather than just that full quote that most people are going to see. And it is worth crediting the fact that he does bookend his statement by saying that he's all about making the game safer. But at the same time, he does say he's not a big fan of it. He pauses for a laugh break when he says that he's a defensive player. And the most concerning thing, this is the part that really disturbed me, was that when he said that if he had a perfect place to die, he would die in the field, there was a big applause break, as if he was saying something that would be a good thing for football. And truly and sincerely, I think that would be the biggest nightmare of all time for the NFL right now. And so the idea that, you said earlier that perhaps maybe this shouldn't be taken directly for his word. He says literally, and that's not a lie, within that exact quote. And I guess that's sort of a figure of speech, but at the same time, so much of the quote is more about the fact that he would actually want to do this rather than the part of making the game safer. And if you look at some of the, some of the history with death in football, obviously the CTE research is terrible. The one that came out last week about 110 of 111 former NFL players.
Alarming.
Is really bad. And, I'm certainly not accusing you or Jamal Adams of saying that that's okay.
No,
but at the same time, go ahead. No,
yeah, and you'd be foolish if you were to do that. And I know you're not doing that because, you look at some of this game, and I talked to guys like Ray Lucas that, had suicidal thoughts. We've heard the stories of Mike Webster, and it definitely is a big-time concern. I just think when and also you have to remember, and I know it's not an excuse, but the kid is 21 years old, and he's probably not the right person to be put in this spot yesterday. When the Ravens did this, they had Benjamin Watson. But when I look at that yesterday, there's no doubt about it. The applause by the crowd, it was a little bit awkward. I'll give you that. But I just think he was going more off of approaching this question by trying to avoid it a little bit. But he did talk about the safety issue of the game. I just think he was trying to make the point that he would do whatever it takes to succeed in football. And, hey, that's what it is right now. Right now, these players, they have the ability to get all this information, and it's their choice if they want to continue to play the game. And we've seen some players recently retire, and I bet you that probably does have to have some effect from some of the more new information that we're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the point that you make about, him being a rookie is crucial. If you look at, Ross Tucker, who yesterday wrote for Sports on Earth, and Ross played offensive line for 2007. He said, frankly, knowing what I know now, it's hard to imagine walking out to that field during training camp and putting my helmet on so that I could not catch other huge athletes for 2.5 hours each day. If you look at Martellus Bennett, who yesterday came out and said, I hope all these young cats that are willing to die for the game of football find a higher purpose in life. I think if you look at, the history of, death in football, only one player has ever died on the field. That was in 1971, and that was from a heart attack. But in the AFL, there was a player who, or the Arena Football League specifically, there was a player who died of blunt force trauma in 2005 and died from a spinal injury. And I don't know if he died on the field or not. That information never became clear. But that would truly be a possibility in football, especially with the way Adams is talking about as a defensive player. As these players get bigger and stronger and, better at whatever it may be to be a defender in football, to be a successful defender in football, these sort of things, as you said earlier, can be fluke accidents. No one's wishing on this. But when you have it so that a player is saying that he's willing to do it and fans respond with cheers and laughter, that's not the kind of move that I think football should be accepting. With Roger Goodell, on the stage right there next to him as it's happening, that is truly his biggest concern of all time, I'd imagine, would be how bad that would be, especially with all the TV deals right now, NFL Red Zone, Twitter. That footage would come out immediately, and people would see, God forbid, something like this happening, and I just truly can't imagine something that would stagnate the growth of the game as much as an incident like that. And it was met with, to me, disturbing laughter and with disturbing cheers.
I just don't think it's disturbing. I think that's people's opinion, and you're entitled to your opinion as well. It was a little awkward yesterday, but I wouldn't just say that it was totally, like shocking that those guys did this. You got to remember the target audience that was there. It's, Jet fans, Jet ticket holders, and all that. But let me ask you just one more thing and circle back on something you said. When it comes to defensive players and the rules things that you were talking about, don't you think most defensive players wouldn't be in favor of changing the rules, because it does hurt the way that they do play their position and they make their money?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And football in and of itself is a dangerous game. And these players absolutely know what they're signing up for. And, in Adams' case, he lives and breathes it. This is what he's passionate about. This is his drug of choice, as you said earlier. And in that case, when it comes to making the rules different, there isn't a clear answer for that. There isn't necessarily somebody out there with a solution that we're all actively ignoring. But I think the dialogue on an issue like this can be more productive and more towards, better research tactics, better answers, rather than saying, well, screw it, I'm comfortable dying on the field. That's where I literally want to die. I just think that sort of narrative is a little weird to me.
Now, one thing I will say about yesterday, and I thought Goodell handled the situation of Adams fine, and he went from the passion perspective in his response to that. But the one answer that he had just terribly yesterday, when he's talking about how football players usually, the statistics show that they live longer, 5-6 years longer than regular human beings. Just what did you make out of that? I thought that was another, bad remark by the commissioner of the National Football League, and I thought that was embarrassing yesterday.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with you, and I feel like he's basically, walking back a point that doesn't really exist. That's not the conversation that we should be having right now.
Agreed.
If we're going to be having a conversation about football, we can't be making up stats about, about whether or not they live longer, when all the evidence right now is proving that realistically these players are having traumatic experiences at the end of their lives. Players have come to facilities, threatening suicide. So many people are going through just horrifying things, and that's just on the topic of brains. We're not getting into the fact of their backs, of their knees, of torn ligaments that they've suffered, and to make the point about football players live longer than average human beings is just completely neglecting the point that we should be having right now, which should be a more thoughtful and dialogue towards actually aiming towards to helping these players in their post-retirement.
And we all know that for so many years, the NFL ignored the link from playing football to CTE. And we all saw the movie Concussion, and we read all the articles and all the research as well. The future of football, because still, for some people, it's their only way out in life, and it's their only opportunity to seek fortune. The NFL is at a point where if they look at the youth, they're going to have some parents that are going to say, no, we know about the dangers of football and CT and everything. We're not going to let my kid play. And some parents are going to say, hey, I'm going to let my child play. So how about the future of football? Because we all know this issue is never going away.
I do take a little issue with the idea of football being the only way out. Obviously, there are situations where a player specifically really identifies with football as his passion, as his ideal, as his goal, the same way, you and I may have looked at sports media. But, that there's a difference between, what your dream is and what the only option is. A lot of these players are in a situation right now where this is what they've always wanted. This has been, the dream that they've always been chasing. But if they pursued other things and put their same attention, same kind of, hours and hours and hours and hours of countless work into it, they could have, pursued something different, obviously. But if they wanted football, then that's the thing that they're going to get. And, you do risk the idea of health when you sign up for a game like this in a lot of ways. But, when it comes to changing the rules, that's not a conversation that I'm really privy to having an answer for, because, I'm not as much of a player as I am an analyst, and I'm following the culture of it, following the stories and the narrative. But when it comes to actually changing the rules of the game, it feels a little bit uncomfortable for me to jump in there because for me, I would hate to see players get hurt. It's one of my least favorite things on the job is writing about someone's ACL tear or someone's brain trauma. And when I see, these kind of things happen where someone says like that they would be willing to die in a field, regardless of how literal or not we take that, it just sort of makes me shudder a little bit. And while I don't know what the solution would be, because football is a game where these sort of things can happen, it's also a conversation that, needs to be more at the forefront. And rather than Roger Goodell saying, hey, football players live longer or whatever it may be, I think that we need to just have as a collective group, and not just sports media, not just, sports radio, but, the players, the referees, all of it.
You know what the problem is? The game just will never not be dangerous. And that's the problem that the league faces. The game will never not be dangerous. When you have a sport where people are tackling each other, and we all know what happened, here in New Jersey, the terrible Eric LeGrand injury that completely changed his life. When you have two people running at one another, there's no good resolution to this. And I just don't see what the thing is that you would have, what the resolution would be that would make the game safer, but also not ruin the game completely. That's the big problem for me that the NFL faces.
Yeah, no, I would completely agree with that. That's just a fact. Football is that kind of a game. There are going to be those consequences, and when you play football, like, these are the things that you have to be mindful of. And as a fan, you have to be mindful of it too. I remember when I went to the University of Oregon, and I became friends with some of the football players, and then I watched them suffer these just gruesome injuries, whether they were broken legs or whether they had to be carted off the field, and just seeing them having to limp around campus for the remainder of the semester, or in one particular case, the player needing to get flown home and literally needs to be at his hometown rather than at school due to the gruesome nature of his injury. And these are the sort of things that the fans that are cheering maybe don't think of as much, when they don't really think of them as much as potentially peers, which is really what we all are, as much as they are commodities of entertainment. And, the idea of Jamal Adams' passion is certainly undeniable. He was ridiculously passionate. I believe that he's willing to give everything to this game. And for a Jets fan, that's what you want. You want somebody who's going to willing to put in all of the work and all of the effort. So that's, for a Jets fan, great. But for, the greater conversation of, his own safety and, as Martellus Bennett said, a higher purpose, that's kind of where I begin to raise my eyebrows a little bit.
Bryan Kalbrosky joining us on the Zach Gelb Show, ramswire.usatoday.com. Bryan, appreciate the insight. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. It was a great conversation.
No problem. There's Bryan Kalbrosky joining us. I'll read you the quote one more time. I'm all about making the game safer, but as a defensive player, I'm not a big fan of it. But I get it. I can speak for a lot of guys that play the game. We live and breathe football. This is what we are so passionate about. Literally, if I had a perfect place to die, I would die on the field. And that's not a lie. There's so much sacrifice that we go through as a team, and just connecting as one and winning ball games. There's nothing like playing the game of football, but again, I'm all about making the game safer. I did not have a problem with those remarks yesterday. I'll continue to explain that in just a second. In terms of the rounds of applause, it didn't need to happen. I could see why some would say it was a little awkward, but I'm not annoyed by the round of applause, because I think the Jet fan that was there yesterday was applauding the passion element of it. And I'm just not disturbed by these comments by Jamal Adams. I'm just not. Because I think that he's trying to make the point that this is his life, this is his livelihood, and he'll do whatever it takes to win. And how many times when I played football in high school on a much smaller scale did the coach say, do whatever it takes to win? A lot of times. So I understand that mentality that Jamal Adams is coming from. And the part where he says, as a defensive player, he's not a big fan of it. Yeah, most defensive players aren't a big fan of taking the way that they could hit and where they could hit. They're not. But here is the reality of the situation, whether you agree with Adams' comments or not. The NFL is not going anywhere. The NFL is a multi-billion-dollar business. And the NFL is something, look at some of the issues that we have. Health issues, protest issues, racial issues, domestic abuse issues. The NFL goes through so much of that and is on a bigger stage than anybody. But we all still love the game. And we still love the game because it's entertaining. You play your fantasy football, and it's great to watch. But the players on the field, there is no doubt about it, they sacrifice a lot. And that's why when we get into the Odell Beckham conversation or the Aaron Donald conversation, when these players clearly want more money, now I don't think Odell Beckham's going to be the highest paid player in the league, but I don't criticize him for wanting that because these guys put everything on the line. They do. Now, sometimes the timing of these things don't make sense. In Donald's case and Beckham's case, I don't have a problem with the timing of it. But these players, they risk a lot. And 20 years ago, they didn't make these salaries. And now some of these players, they can't afford the medical bills and everything. But the point is, right now, football is not going away. And there is a lot of things that happen in football that you can't prevent. And one of those things is injuries. You cannot prevent injuries. And yes, have they made the game safer? Sure. And some of the rules, they do make a lot of sense. But with that being said, you can't eliminate an injury. And there will always be that risk. And football will always be a dangerous sport. Now, you can improve technique, and teams do that. You can give them more time off and not have as many padded practices, and teams do that. But when that game is being played, you're fighting for a spot. You're fighting for a game check, and people will do whatever it takes to make sure that they're putting themselves in the best position to continue to keep on getting those game checks because it is a big-time amount of money. So when I look at the comments yesterday, I could understand why some people would be frustrated with all the long history of this topic. But when he says everything that he did say yesterday, I think it was just more from a passion perspective. And I think the point that he was making was, yes, the game and the way that they're making the game safer, it's good for football. Even though he's not a big fan of some of it, what it does for a defensive player, he still understands it. That's why he's having the conversation. But I just think he was trying to take the way out of going with passion and saying, this is my livelihood, my life depends on this, and he would do anything for the game. The part where he's saying, it's the perfect place to die, I would die on the field, I think it's getting blown out of proportion. I think it's getting taken out of context. And I think this is something where when we look at this and really evaluate it, that I just don't think it's right to just take those quotes, just that part of it, and blast it everywhere. Because when you read the whole quote, I look at it more from a passion perspective rather than looking at it as saying, oh, this guy, he just wants to die on the field tomorrow. No, he doesn't want to do that. So before we take a break, let me just real quickly, I want to bring up this part, the Roger Goodell quote from yesterday. Now, I was fine with what Goodell said in response to the Adams question, and he went off the line of, I think he was just trying to show his passion. However, with that being said, Goodell was also asked another question in this interview period where fans were able to talk to the commissioner and some of the players. And here is what Roger Goodell did say to one of those questions.
The average NFL player lives 5 years longer than you, on average. So their lifespan is actually longer and healthier. And I think because of all the advancements, including the medical care, that number is going to even increase for them.
That's a bad look for the commissioner. And to me, from an optics perspective, it looks like he's just trying to further avoid this topic by pointing a finger at someone saying, hey, the NFL player lives longer than you. Well, I just didn't like that yesterday. I just didn't. And that's the problem the NFL faces. They know there's no resolution to this. And you don't want to look bad. And this quote yesterday did make the commissioner look bad. All right, 609-9199-D200. This is the Zach Gelb Show, Fox Sports 920 The Jersey. A good and well-needed conversation with Bryan Kalbrosky. We appreciate him coming on. Make sure you read his work at ramswire.usatoday.com, the editor for USA Today's Ram coverage. We'll take a break. We're coming on back.